So fine. Yeah, welcome everyone. Professor Christophe Jaffrelot, the speaker for today's Nirman Foundation lecture, colleagues from my center, other centers and schools, students from CPS, other centers and schools, ladies and gentlemen, hearty welcome to this important event of the Center for Political Studies. The CPS was founded in 1971 and it has an outstanding reputation for academic excellence. Recently, the center has been recognized as one of the 100 best centers world over in QS ranking in politics with School of International Studies at JNU. In keeping with the spirit of JNU Act of 1966, the Center for Political Studies came to incorporate a strong interdisciplinary emphasis in the structure and design of its syllabi. Since then, the CPS has become one of the largest centers of School of Social Sciences, drawing students from all parts of the country as well as abroad. The center offers degree both at master's and doctorate levels. The Nirman Foundation Fund, with a lifetime endowment from Professor Bhiku Parekh, was given in 2005. It has been supporting many programs in CPS. It is committed to provide scholarships to MA students and support for an annual lecture and research workshops for faculty and students. It is probably one of the major endowment coming to JNU. In the past, several eminent scholars have delivered the Nirman Foundation lecture, including in 2006, we began with Madhav Menon, then Lloyd and Susan Rudolph, then Upendra Bakshi, Mark Galanter, Partha Chatterjee, Charles Taylor, Chetan Bhatt, Sudipta Kaviraj, Arindam Chaudhary, Chakravarti, V. Geeta, Usha Ramanathan, Rajiv Bhargava, Prasenjit Doira, Leela Fernandez, and Arjun Appadurai last time. Today we have Dr. Christophe Jaffrelot. All of you know him very well. Dr. Jaffrelot is now Senior Research Fellow at Seri Science Po CNRS, Professor in Indian Politics and Sociology at King's India Institute, and President of French Political Science Association. He works as a non-resident fellow at the Carney's Endowment for International Peace and as a permanent consultant at the Center for Policy Planning staff of French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Among his recent publications are as co-editor with Atul Kohli and K. Murli, Business and Politics in India, OUP 2019. Then with A. Chatterjee and T.B. Hansen, The Majoritarian State, How Hindu Nationalism is Changing India. As co-author with Partinav Anil, India's First Dictatorship, The Emergency 1975 to 77, Hurst 2020. And as a sole author, Modi's India, Hindu Nationalism and Rise of Ethnic Democracy, Princeton University Press 2021. He has been supporting the young minds to develop academically, and we see a lot of articles in newspapers appearing with young scholars. Similarly, Professor Jaffrelot and me have edited book Dr. Ambedkar and Democracy by Oxford University Press, published in 2018. Dr. Jaffrelot will be speaking on challenges of inequalities and social justice in today's India. Welcome, Professor Jaffrelot, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Narendra, for these kind words of introduction. And it's always a great pleasure to be back in JNU. The room I'm seeing is a room where I have spoken so many times over the last 30 years, even 35 years. And I've learned so much also from those who spoke in this room and in CPS the list of scholars you've mentioned, Narendra, well, put me on some memory lane, and I'm very pleased to succeed Arjun Appadurai for this yearly event. Well, I will indeed present some ongoing research that I am conducting with an alumnus of GNU, Kalai Yarasan. Kalai Yarasan and myself have just completed a book manuscript on the dominant caste in 4 states, Maharashtra, Haryana, Gujarat, and Andhra, Telangana as well. And it's an interesting work, I think, because it shows the importance of the urban-rural divide. It also shows the changing dynamic of caste-based inequalities. So I'd like to share that with you, but in a larger perspective, because as Narendra has just mentioned, he wanted me to speak more generally, in a more general manner about inequalities in India today. So let me share screen and make it as clear as I can for you to see on the screen. There'll be many figures today. It's a very data supported presentation, 40 slides, 40 tables almost. So I hope you'll be able to see that clearly. If not, I will give the figures, and do not hesitate to interrupt me if you miss some of this data. We'll have, in any case, some time for the Q&A. I'll speak for 1 hour maximum, and we'll have 20-25 minutes for the Q&A, which is, I hope, sufficient. So let me begin with, of course, something nobody says these days, and I want to emphasize the fact that the data I'm going to share with you are, for many of them, a little bit out of date, because there is no data available. There are very few data available in India today. But with the data we have, we can definitely argue that inequalities are on the rise in India. Of course, traditional forms of inequalities along caste and class lines, as well as the usual urban-rural divide, all these forms of inequalities have increased in post-liberalization in India. It's not such a recent phenomenon, which, by the way, does not mean that the poor are getting poorer. At least still recently, that was not the case. You do not need the poor to get poorer for inequalities to increase. Simply, the poor are not improving their situation as quickly as the rich, and that is what makes inequalities larger. So these are the things I will look at first, but I'd like to emphasize 2 other forms of inequalities which are more new, that have crystallized recently indeed. One, the making of class differentiation within caste groups, and that's something that is drawing directly from the work we are doing with Kalai. And 2, the socioeconomic decline of Muslims vis-a-vis other religious communities This is something, of course, that needs to be updated because it has certainly increased over the last few years. But let's begin with the larger picture. You know, the larger picture is that one, something we learn from the World Inequality database that India has become the country where equality has risen the most over the last 15 years. There's over the rest of the world again share is anywhere else. So through the percent, South Africa is even more dramatically inequal on the variable that is cast, simply because now we need to look at class within caste and religion within caste, or caste within religion. Well, the urban-rural divide, I'll be quick. It is so well known. There is a decline of the relative income per worker in agriculture. If you look at the GDP at constant prices, the share of agriculture has dropped dramatically from almost 40% in 71 to a little bit more of 11% in 2011. And hopefully we'll have more data very soon. The NSS survey that leaked in 2019 and was not recognized as valid by the Indian government showed that for the first time since we have NSS data, the poverty rates increased in India. And because of the rural dweller, you know, the rural dwellers have seen an increase of the percentage of people living the poverty line, below the poverty line. And as a result, the whole of India appeared as more poor than before, more poor in terms of the percentage of people living below the poverty line. We will wait for a new NSS office survey that hopefully the government will consider as valid for reconfirming this trend, but it's not surprising. It goes with the figures I've shown before. What is clear is, and these are more recent figures, that when you look at the monthly per capita consumption, you know, the usual criterion for measuring poverty in India, the monthly per capita consumption expenditures. When you look at that, you see that the ratio between the urban and the rural kept increasing since the 1970s. But the increase has been dramatic over the last few years, and the 2018 data are particularly disturbing. The ratio jumped to 2.42, which means that it is almost twice what it was in the 1970s. So that's for the overall picture. If we look at the regional picture and look at the statewide situation, we see that the percentage of rural poor is particularly high in the usual suspects: Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Orissa, more than 30%, Madhya Pradesh, more than 35%. But you see also states which are rich as an average: Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra, with a percentage of rural poor that is above 20%, which is really a reflection of these inequalities. Last but not least, how do we explain that? Well, we explain that because rural wages have declined lately. We have, since 2012, 2013, a decline, the average growth in real terms, the average growth in real wages is much less than what it used to be. One of the reasons for that, I have no time to explain more, to expand on that. One of the reasons for that is inflation of the inputs, the cost of the inputs has increased. It's true for fertilizers, it's true for many things. 2, subsidies have declined. 3, the NRHGA has lost its momentum. So you have here one of the reasons why the farmers' movement was so strong, why you have today in Jantar Mantar people fighting for NRHGA. So that was what I wanted to say regarding the urban-rural divide, but this is not the main argument I want to make. This is well known, and I prefer to spend more time on the caste question, and more importantly, of the making of class within caste. Well, this is based on the Human Development Survey, a great source, an amazing source. And we are really longing for the next round, because we are forced to fall back today on data which are 10 years old, more than 10 years old. You can look at the data at the state level, and that's what we've done with Kalai. We have looked at Maharashtra, Gujarat, Haryana, and Andhra, but I will focus on the first 3 only, and I will leave Andhra. What does that tell us? Well, what we see here is clearly that caste and class continue to somewhat coincide. Maharashtra, Brahmins, Marathas, other forward caste are clearly richer than at the other end of the spectrum, STs, OBCs, SCs. That's something you will find. It's a pattern you will find everywhere. In Maharashtra, Gujarat, well, the only difference is their Brahmins are number 2. Unsurprisingly, Brahmins have never been that dominant in Gujarat. So Patels come first, and unsurprisingly, Adivasis, OBCs, SCs come last. Same in Haryana, where you have a clear polarization. And again, Brahmins are not that strong because in Punjab, in Haryana, Brahmins have never been so strong. So caste and class roughly coincide, and the gap, I should have mentioned that, the gap between the rich and the poor increased dramatically. You see the difference between the bars. If you look at the SCs or OBCs in Haryana, you compare the gap between 2004, 2005, and 2011, 2012, and you see that the gap has increased. It has increased everywhere. Same here, same here. But we need to add other variables. One variable that is rather interesting is education. And that's what the Indian Human Development Survey allows you to do, to look at education by caste. When you look at education by caste, you see that the level of education attained by different caste groups in Maharashtra show that Marathas are not doing that well. Only 4.6% of Marathas reached the graduate level and above. When Malis, in spite of being OBCs, have done better. And OBCs at large are not lagging behind. Other OBCs are not lagging behind by far. That was 2004, 2005. The situation is very similar in 2011, 2012. Still, few Marathas are reaching the graduate level, 8.1%. If you compare that to Brahmins, 26%. And they are still lagging behind Malis, 9.5%. Well, this is something you see in Gujarat, where Patels are not terribly educated either, 8% compared to 17% for Brahmins in 2005, 2004, 9.8% in 2011, 2012 against 19% for Brahmins. Education is not a strong point. It's not a strong point of Jat either. You see only 2.9%, only 2.9% of Jats have reached the graduate level, less than OBCs. And this gap remains almost the same when you look at the 2011-2012 data. Jats are lagging behind OBCs in terms of education, and of course, lagging behind forward caste. Well, this is a very important point because it says dominant caste, Marathas, Patels, Jats, have not invested in education. And if they've not invested in education, they have taken a big risk, at least compared to the other groups which have invested in education. You know, if you look at the change in the number of graduates, you see that Dalits, OBCs have invested in education, and the number of graduates has increased dramatically among the Maharashtrian Dalits, Maharashtrian OBCs. Same in Gujarat. OBCs and SCs also are ahead of Patels in terms of the increase, in terms of the change in the number of graduates. And same in Haryana. Dominant caste, Marathas, Patels, Jats are always lagging behind. They have the increase in terms of the number of graduates is less than in the case of SCs and OBCs. That has consequences regarding access to the salariat. In Maharashtra, Marathas have still more salaried people than Dalits and OBCs, but not that much more. In Gujarat, the percentage of Dalits having access to a salaried job is larger than in the case of the Patels. And in Haryana, Jats are lagging behind both OBCs and SCs. Well, this is a reflection of education and a reflection of reservations. And I'll return to the reservation question, of course, by the end. But let's continue with the occupation question. Why are dominant caste not investing in education and not getting salaried jobs? Well, because they are farmers, they are cultivators. That's what they do. That's what they mostly do till today. Kumbi Marathas, of course, Marathas, Patels, Jats, 60%, huge percentage. All these, I repeat, are data coming from the India Human Development Surveys of 2011-2012. What is the final result of this? And this is probably the most important table of today's presentation. The result of this is the making of class within caste. Within the dominant caste, you have people who have not got education, who are still peasants, and who are therefore losing out in terms of income. The mean income in rupees of the bottom 60% of the dominant caste is now below the average annual per capita income for the 3 first quintiles of SCs and OBCs. So you have now dominant caste people and a substantial percentage of dominant caste people who are much less affluent than Dalits and OBCs. That's always been true, but not to that extent in terms of the gap, in terms of the numbers. So if you look at this question from another perspective, you can see that a very substantial percentage of Marathas, Patels, Jats are concentrated in the first quintile. Very, very substantial percentage, an increasing percentage, especially in Gujarat with the Patels and in Haryana with the Jats, and not in Maharashtra. The Marathas have seen a decline of the percentage of people belonging to the last quintiles. But on the other hand, in the 2 other states, you see a great increase. Jats from 47% almost to more than 59%. So there is a kind of impoverishment of otherwise dominant caste. This making of class within caste, within dominant caste, is of course and the fact that some Dalits and some OBCs are catching up in these states are of course the explanations for the demand for reservations that we saw after 2015, when for the first time some Patels asked for being reclassified as OBCs. That was, of course, a surprising move. Why should a Nirman caste be willing to be considered as backward? Well, because reservations appeared as necessary for resisting decline, relative decline, but there was a large percentage of people of that group, of these groups, which experience decline. So that's for caste and class within caste. Let's turn finally to the religion question. And that's another research we've made with Kalai. Muslims, we focus on Muslims, have now to be seen as a group losing ground socioeconomically, and not only a group underrepresented in institutions. Of course, they are not only a group affected by ghettoization, of course they are, but they are also, I repeat, victims of a form of impoverishment in socioeconomic terms. So we work on 15 states in the north, of course, Jammu and Kashmir, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Haryana, and Delhi, where Muslims represented a substantial fraction of the state population according to the 2011 census. In the east, of course, Bihar, Assam, West Bengal, these are the places where you have the largest percentage of Muslims. In the west, Gujarat, where they are less than 10%, like in Rajasthan, by the way, Maharashtra, of course, and in the south, Karnataka, Andhra, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. So all these 15 states, if you go by the 2011 census, represent 95% of the then 170 million Muslims. That is clearly a significant proportion of Muslims in India. We are still using the Indian Human Development Surveys 2005-2012 and other sources, but you will see that in the course of this last bit of my presentation. Well,
Professor Christophe.
Yes.
Yeah, could you please enlarge the screen?
Oh, yes, of course. Sorry. Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah, full screen. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry about that. A very important point. We do not distinguish OBC Muslims from non-OBC Muslims. As you know, there is no SC Muslim officially. Of course, there are, and there are Afzals. But officially, Dalits are bracketed together with OBC Muslims. Dalit Muslims and OBC Muslims are part of the same category. We are not looking at this distinction between Muslims, OBCs, Muslim OBCs, and non-OBC Muslims. Why? Because if you look at the Indian Human Development Survey, that says that 53% of Muslims in India are OBCs. Well, in fact, the gap between OBC Muslims and non-OBC Muslims is very limited. It's really fascinating. The average per capita income of OBC Muslims was 19,263 rupees in the 2011-2012 survey, but it was hardly different, 20,490 rupees for upper caste Muslims. So a marginal 4% difference. It's a fascinating figure that we would like to return to, because it suggests that there is no real class differentiation within Muslims, at least no class differentiation based on caste. You cannot capture the class differentiation within Muslims by relying on the caste criterion. By contrast, on the Hindu side, there is a vast difference, 64%. You know, the per capita income of upper caste Hindus was more than 39,000 rupees in 2011-2012, when it was only 23,841 rupees for OBCs. So that's a kind of note of caution and explanation. We may sometimes mention OBC Muslims, but most of the time we look at Muslims as a whole. To see what? Well, to see mostly that, sorry, I need to escape just to look at the title of the table. If you look at the average annual per capita income, and I'm sorry, the table is very dense, but this average annual per capita income shows something very, very interesting. Muslims are lagging behind in many states. This is the state-wise presentation. So you have caste in the columns: Brahmins, upper caste, OBCs, SCs, and then all Hindus, and then Muslims. What is particularly interesting is to compare the average annual per capita income of SCs compared to all Muslims. Muslims are lagging behind Dalits in terms of average per capita income almost everywhere. Let's look only at the 2011-2012 data. Of course, not in Jammu and Kashmir, not in UP, but in Haryana, in Delhi, in Gujarat, in Maharashtra, in West Bengal, in Assam, in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu. You know, well, Tamil Nadu is of course an interesting case. We'll return to that because that's a place where you have also a larger income, but still Dalits are ahead. So in many states, Muslims are now lagging behind Dalits, and of course OBCs, and of course upper caste in terms of income. In terms also of access to salaried jobs. That's another interesting criterion. I focus only on the 2011-2012 data to show that Muslims are still ahead in terms of the percentage of people of their community having access to salaried jobs in Jammu and Kashmir, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, UP, but Muslims are lagging behind Dalits and vastly lagging behind Dalits in Haryana, Delhi, Gujarat, even Maharashtra, even Bihar, West Bengal, Assam, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh. So, of course, both things are related. Muslims are lagging behind Dalits in terms of average income, partly because they are lagging behind Dalits in terms of salaried jobs. And this is again a reflection of what reservations can give or not. If we now look at this table, which is more recent, and I think it is particularly interesting because it is more recent. You know, this is what the NSSO gave us recently, the periodic labor force survey data, which in that particular case refer to those who are employed in government and public sector. So this is the ratio of share in government, in public sector jobs to population for Dalits, OBCs, upper caste, all Hindus, and Muslims. Well, there is only one state where Muslims are not lagging behind both SCs and OBCs, and that is Jammu and Kashmir, and it is only vis-a-vis OBCs. Everywhere else, Muslims are lagging behind both Dalits and OBCs in terms of access to the public sector, which is really remarkable. We have no time to go back to the Sachar Committee findings, but that is very well in tune with what the Sachar Committee told us in 2005. When you looked at the presence of Muslims among the salariat, you saw that already then Muslims were vastly underrepresented in terms of access to government jobs, when they were not so badly represented in the private sector, which showed that discrimination was the explanation, and it came from the government, not from the private companies. Education. Education is also very important. Percentage of graduates. What is the percentage of graduates among Brahmins, upper caste at large, OBCs, SCs, all Hindus, and Muslims? Well, there are very few states where the percentage of Muslims is as large, percentage of Muslims having graduated is as large as the OBCs. You know, Jammu and Kashmir, of course, we don't have figures for the OBCs. Delhi, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, and Tamil Nadu are the only states where Muslims are not lagging behind OBCs in terms of education. And I don't want to give you too many information, but we are almost done. But I want to insist on that one again, because it's a recent survey, always the periodic labor force survey, that gives us an interesting figure on the percentage of graduates of the age bracket 21-29. Madhya Pradesh is the only aberration in terms of the value, but we need to take the survey for what it is. In all the other states, except Karnataka, the percentage of Muslims of that age bracket having less graduates than SCs is there. We are working on this with Kalai at the moment, and in fact we will publish very soon an update, because what we saw, the decline of education among Muslims, has been precipitated over the last 2-3 years. So we will very soon update this data and show an amazing decline, unprecedented decline in terms of access to education of Muslims. Minus 4%, minus 4 percentage points. Never in the history of Indian statistics had we seen a group regressing in terms of education, and not with a minor percentage, but a rather significant percentage. We have not processed all the data yet, but we have the aggregate finding, which is absolutely devastating. Last, the gap in terms of incomes between different groups. If you have 100 for SCs, how much do you have for Muslims? And in most of the states, Haryana, Delhi, Gujarat, Maharashtra, West Bengal, Assam, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, you have a decline in terms of the percentage Muslims represent vis-a-vis Dalits. And here the trend is very clear. Muslims were ahead in most of the states in 2004, 2005. Muslims are lagging behind Dalits in most of the states in 2011, 2012. And that's something we need to update, and we will update. So a lot of data, and I don't want to add, except that I'd like to make 3 points, and I'll have to return to some tables for making the last point. One, we have clearly a rise of inequalities if you look at global picture, but the forms of inequalities are diversifying. You have of course the urban-rural divide. You have of course the class divide. You have of course the caste divide, but you have also class within caste, and therefore you need to disaggregate caste. I would add something I had no time to deal with. You need to disaggregate castes themselves, and subcaste have to be taken into account. So there is class within caste, but there is also subcaste within caste. You look at Karwa Patels and Lova Patels, you look at all kinds of Dalit subgroups. That's the level we need to reach. And then you have also class and religion. I mean, religion becoming a kind of class, Muslims becoming a kind of socioeconomic category, because it's very homogeneous and it is lagging behind most of the caste groups, including SCs and OBCs, Hindu SCs and Hindu OBCs. So that's why we need to look at inequalities with a larger sample of factors and criteria. It does not mean that we should not continue to look at more traditional forms of inequalities. And I'd like to focus on one point to conclude. I've said that the beginning of this process, the beginning of these trends towards more inequalities, started in 1991 with liberalization. Well, we can document that in one very simple way. The liberalization policies found expression in the shrinking of the Indian state. If you look at the total employment of the central public sector enterprises, the erosion is constant. And it has continued. It is in fact accelerating because privatization is the order of the day. That implies that you have less workers in the public sector, all the more so as not only you have less posts, but you have also more vacant posts. And the vacancies are particularly huge in the bureaucracy and the public sector. What does that mean? Well, it means that reservations are not playing the kind of role they used to play. You know, look at this very interesting table showing the representation of SCs and OBCs in central government services. There is only one figure I would like to draw your attention to. Look at the number of OBCs and SCs who have benefited from reservations. Well, look at SCs only. That will be sufficient. This is, if you look at the four squares where my arrow, around which my arrow is turning, what does it show? It shows that the percentage of Dalits has increased from 1720 to 1730. But in terms of numbers, those who have benefited from this quota are less numerous, from 5.18 lakhs to 4.55 lakhs, because you can retain a large proportion in terms of percentage, and at the same time lose in absolute numbers simply because the number of employees is declining, because the state is shrinking. Positive discrimination, reservations do not help Dalits as much as they used to do. And it's also true when you look at the central public sector enterprises. Again, let's focus on SCs. Let's focus on the four squares at the bottom. You have, again, an increase in the percentage from 18.1 to 18.14, and a significant decline in terms of numbers from 16.08 to 14.86. Well, what I want to draw your attention to, and that's my the last point I wanted to make, is that there is a risk of seeing old forms of inequalities staging a comeback, in addition to the emergence of new forms of inequalities. Because if the mechanism of reservations is neutralized, is weakened, simply because of the shrinking of the state, then of course, a very important factor of progressive policies will also disappear. So that's my note of caution. We need to look at new forms of inequalities. We should certainly not ignore old forms of inequalities, including caste-based inequalities, which have never disappeared, but were somewhat on the right path and may experience a setback, a regression. And this is one of the things we will look at, of course, when we'll get the next Indian Human Development Survey, hopefully by the end of the year. I stop here. I hope I've not been too long. I had made sure that I would not speak for more than 1 hour in order to have 20-25 minutes for the for the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Professor Christophe Jaffrelot, for this very data-studied presentation. And we students of political science in CPS generally don't have this kind of presentations. Let me tell you very, very frankly, because here we generally do the qualitative kind of studies. So quantitative studies, something which I think must have. Thank you very much. And now the students can, everyone can have some questions if you have, but anyone asking question will have to come here actually, because otherwise Professor Jaffrelot will not be able to listen. Yeah, please come here one by one and yes.
In the meantime, Narendra, in the meantime, because
Yes,
people may be moving toward the mic now. In the meantime, let me respond to this point that you've just made. You know, I don't look at myself as a quantitative researcher. In fact, fieldwork has always been my instinct. What I now consider is that we need to combine both, and the figures I've just shown are largely the result of ethnographic research. You know, when you are with the Indian Human Development Service, you create your own categories. And you create your own categories because you know who is OBC, who is SC. You know, you can't aggregate, create your groups without a very deep knowledge of what Indian society is. And that's why I think we need mixed methods. We need quantitative as well as quantitative methods. Yeah, that's what the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, surely. Yeah. We have with us first question from, please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Jaffrelot, for such a wonderful lecture. Actually, which sir already told you, we don't have that kind of set in our studies. And lastly, what you have mentioned, my question will coming from that aspect, the ethnography, what you mentioned. So when we talk about the group inequality, generally what you have mentioned, it's some sort of provide the economic status of particularly marginalized group. But how do you look the kind of discrimination that has been experienced by a person despite, in terms of economics, somebody coming from the marginalized communities, and despite the economic prosperity have gone, but the kind of stigma, humiliation, and disgust it exists towards them. So how do you think, what kind of social policy, public policy or state can do, or any way of kind of policy making way we can look at this kind of problem?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. A very good question.
Please.
Well, you can measure the resilience of the stigma in two different ways. One, you can see that, or you can show that even if a Dalit benefiting from reservations, becoming middle class, cannot find a flat, cannot find a place in a mixed neighborhood. No, the ghettoization process, the stigma is revealed by the difficult transformation of class into caste into class, if you want, you know. So you are forced to stay in a Muslim in a Dalit basti that is a ghetto because of the stigma. That's one way to show that it is still there. That's clearly a piece of evidence. The other thing that you can do is to send the same CV with a Brahmin name, with a Dalit name, with a Muslim name. In fact, that's what Professor Torat did not so long ago, a fascinating panel study that was very revealing of the prejudice. Because who is invited for the interview? First come the Brahmin, second comes the Dalit, and last but not least, the Muslim, which is very interesting because, and that this is something we do everywhere in the world these days. That's a very good method because, again, it's a mixed method. You have big numbers because you send this to thousands of companies at the same time, and it's ethnographic because only you know what is the Dalit name that will be identified as Dalit. No pollster based in the US looking only at databases can do this research. It's typical of a mixed research agenda. You can do that. We have done it also in Europe, and in Europe you can also show. We have also used photographs. So you do not only have a Muslim name, but you have a man who is a bearded Muslim, and you have a man who is a bearded black Muslim, and then you see discrimination within discrimination. That's another way to measure stigmatization. Yeah, I fully agree. The stigma is there, and that's why creamy layer can apply to OBCs. The creamy layer technique may not be relevant for Dalits because it's not because you have got the right education, the right family background, that you will not be discriminated against. And touchability is much stronger than any other stigma affecting OBCs.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So we have another question from Shaurya.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. My name is Shaurya, sir. I'm a PhD student in CPS. My question is, sir, your talk majorly is based on the quantitative aspect, and sir, so data is very, very important, and it reveals a lot of things. But sir, like I would have also liked to know a lot of reasons behind what is why a certain data reflection is in a certain way. Like, what are the causes? Like, if the Muslim community is backward, the other community, what are the major reasons, and what, like, the role of the state, and how are they getting excluded from the society? And my second question is on, like, sir, you talked about inequality, sir. So I would also like to highlight the aspect, like disability is also a category of vulnerable. Like, we are also vulnerable. But sir, how would disability figure in terms of the intersectionality of caste and, let's say, disability? And is disability an important criteria when combined with other inequalities? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for these two questions. Great questions again. Well, causes. This is precisely the next step. You find very converging conclusions from the kind of presentation I've made. This is the first step. Now, I think nobody can deny that inequalities are increasing and Muslims are clearly one of the casualties of these growing inequalities. The next step is explanation. Why? And this is why we have started a research including, implicating more than 60 people doing fieldwork at the moment on this very question. Why are Muslims so badly located in Indian society? One explanation is prejudice, discrimination. So that's why I was mentioning bypassing that the comparison between underrepresentation of Muslims in the public jobs and in the private jobs is so interesting. The private employers do not discriminate so much. It shows that there is a government attitude. It's a very important conclusion. Then you have another explanation, that is the dropout rate of Muslims. Why are Muslims leaving school so quickly? And it's partly because of this sense of discrimination. It's also because of the kind of atmosphere there is in the classroom these days. So we are doing ethnographic work with teachers, with students, to find out why do they leave the school. So you see, this is exactly the next step. The next step is we have found a situation that we need to explain, and ethnographic work will help us to do it now. And this is a work in progress, clearly. So discrimination, yes. Self-censorship, possibly. And then why? Why don't Muslims leave? Why do they leave the scene? Well, we know the response to a large extent. We need to document that. We need to prove that. We need to show that Indian Muslims can now be seen as second-class citizens in their own country, and therefore withdrawing their shell for many reasons. Your other question regarding disabilities. Certainly, discrimination is badly affecting the disabled. In fact, I've not looked at all the victims of discriminations. I've not looked at all the people affected by growing inequalities. People affected by disabilities are one group. Women form another group. Gender is clearly now a criterion we need to use for measuring growing inequalities. Why are women so few on the job market? We have never seen so few women trying to get a job in India today. The percentage of women in the workforce is below what it is in the Middle East. Unprecedented. They withdraw from the job market. They don't try to get a job anymore. Why? Well, joblessness is certainly a problem, but it's a problem for everybody. Why should girls self-censor more than boys? And that's clearly, again, reflecting social considerations, and it's regressive. There is no society, there is no progressive society without women's emancipation. That's clearly not an issue. Everybody would go by that. So I agree, we need to include additional factors, and then it takes us to what you were mentioning, intersectionality. We have to look at not only Muslims, but Dalit Muslims, women Dalit Muslims, and we are doing that. In fact, this is what we are doing as well looking at girls' education among Muslims in particular, in the group I have mentioned.
Yeah. Any other question? Yes. Please come. Anyone else? You have question? Okay. We'll have one more question only. After Utkarsh, anyone else? Okay, Sukesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jaffrelot, for that wonderful presentation. I mean, many things were new for all of us, and they are going to become interesting notes to do future research. So thank you for, it's been really proved to be a catalyst for thinking through many things. Just two quick queries on specifically related to the slides you showed, the condition of Muslims in India. One is, I just want to know the political dissonance between what you showed socio-economically and what is happening politically. One is, you showed that within the Muslim group itself, there is not a sharp divide between, say, OBC, SC Muslims and upper caste Muslims. But why is the issue of Pasmanda Muslims now taking a very, a political currency on its own, if there is no such divide? One is that. Secondly, if there is such a stark inequality, formation of a class within Muslims, like they are now, socio-economically, they are far behind other groups. Why are these agendas not becoming a sort of political agendas? Why are then these socio-economic problems not converting themselves into these social cleavages into political cleavages? Why are they not becoming political issues for minority politics or Muslim politics in India? Those two basic queries. Sorry, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these two great questions. Well, I've not said there is no such divide. I have not said there is no divide between low caste Muslims and upper caste Muslims. There is. What I've said is that when you look at income distribution, you do not see it, which means that the divide is much more caste-based, status-based, than based on socioeconomic reality. But we know that you can have a very important, form of antagonism between groups belonging to different status. And symbols, status matter. Two, well, clearly there is a divide and rule politics behind this Pasmanda business. Divide and rule is something politicians are so good at. And if you want to divide Muslims because they are seen as forming a bloc, and in some states, if they vote as a bloc, they may make your life complicated, and BR is a case in point, then you try to divide and make these groups more antagonistic. We saw that, by the way, also in Lucknow with the Shia-Sunni divide. You will not find a clear socio-economic hiatus between the Shias and the Sunnis, but it was not too difficult to co-opt Shias for BJP. The second question, why isn't it on the political agenda of Muslims? Well, it is. It is. Remember, not long ago, there was a demand for reservations for Muslims in Maharashtra. And it was first initiated by the Congress NCP government between 2014, when the Shiv Sena BJP government took over in 2014. They rejected that, and now they are also abolishing reservations for Muslims in Karnataka. It's on the agenda of Muslim leaders, definitely, including Owaisi. They consider that reservations is the only way out, and that's what the Mishra committee report, and even to some extent the Satra committee report, had said already. So I think it's there. The only thing is, how can you promote reservations for Muslims in today's India? Already what was there in the Satra committee could not be implemented, and when it has been implemented, it has been dismantled. The Maulana Azad scholarship has been dismantled, for instance. Very difficult in this era of Hindu majoritarianism to defend the cause of minorities, especially because you can claim that in the constitution, religion is not a legal basis for reservation. Well, that's something that did not prevent Kerala, Karnataka to have reservations for Muslims, but that may change, and they may undo what has been done at the state level by some southern countries.